Good morning. We'll talk a little bit about usability testing. This is the first part of the series. We'll go into usability testing, understanding basic considerations, and then we're going to look at some of the ways testing can be done. So let's start. General lines of thought. This is my thought, not Stephen Krug's. That's the book we'll be using, or that's the reference we'll be using in terms of understanding what usability is all about and how to do usability testing. But these are completely my thoughts. See, remember that you can use technology to make the content dynamic, but you can't make the design dynamic. Right? So the design still follows cascading style sheets. So designs will follow predefined CSS, so cascading style sheets, which basically means things are put in order. Things are put in order in such a way so that you don't really get a chance to move things around in terms of deciding where a frame goes or where a container goes or where a div goes. But you can change the content. So once again, think of it more like building a house. Right, you know where the windows are, that follows the blueprint. You know where the HVAC system is, you know where the vents are, you know where the doors are. You can embellish the door, you can make the doors look nicer, the windows look nicer, but you really can't move the windows around every day, or you can't change the days around every day. So a CSS is very much like a blueprint. You have to follow the blueprint where things go. Now what goes in there can be changed. So once again, technology can be used to make the content dynamic, not the design dynamic. Second, always keep in mind that how and where users access and experience your site, they'll vary. So what you are doing is going to vary based on where the user and how the user experiences it, right? So we are dependent on many things. We are dependent on things like a network connection. The very fact, right now as I'm speaking, the coronavirus crisis is sort of quasi-prime time. Now, as that's happening, what's also happening is networks are slowing down their bandwidth, mainly because bandwidth consumption is so high right now. Now, if bandwidth consumption is very high, networks are trying to sort of taper it down, which also means that the same rich content might take a bit of longer time. Now, if you're on a Wi-Fi versus you're on cellular, it'll change. If you're on Ethernet with an RJ45 connection or something like that, it's going to change. So whether you're wired, whether you're wireless, whether you're on cellular, it'll change. Not only that, it'll also change based on the device. So the user can access it on various screens with different resolutions. Remember that smartphone and table orientations, vertical or horizontal orientation, can change content presentation. Now, of course, think of places in Africa or countries like India or Vietnam, where there might be people who even have smartphones with way lower resolution or way different older type of screens. And then suddenly, if you, for example, have a 320 pixel screen, you have to think of how am I going to scale it so that even people in those countries can get to see what they need to see. And remember, it's not always a story about rich content, watching Netflix videos, but also giving public service information. So just be careful and understand that vertical and horizontal orientations can change the content presentation. Network bandwidth can change our user experience, and of course the very fact that the screen size and the pixel depth and intensity can also change our entire experience. Next part is understanding that web caches and cookies can change usability and user experience. For example, a browser cache was prohibiting users from clicking on the next button, which was grayed out. So web caches are nothing but things that are downloaded a priori based on your prior visitations that hold it and maintain it and assume that those are the things that you want. So oftentimes these caches can create a bit of a conflict, because sometimes the programming is such that the cache assumes that you've already done something. So unless you clear the cache, it doesn't allow you to move to the next set. And that's the example, that the next button was grayed out because the web cache had thought that the next button had already been pressed in a previous engagement. So remember that web caches and cookies can really change usability and user experience, which means oftentimes it might be a prudent idea, depending on the company, to think of whether should I flush the cache and the cookies, and how do I move forward with it. There's a cost to it, which is you'll forget, or the users might feel lower usability and user experience because suddenly they have it actually retains no memory. But on the other hand, it also gives them a tabula rasa, fresh, an open slate to run their stuff again. So understand the cost of each. Remember, every single decision comes with a cost and a benefit. Now, of course, content can also slow pages. So if you have very, very rich content, and unless there's a rich content provisioning system, if you can't see something, you might actually suffer based on where you're looking at the page, how you're looking at the page, on what screen you're looking at it, the network connection and everything. Finally, use logic to drive usability and usability testing checks if your logic is aligned with the user. Make sure, and when we are inventing, just like invention, you have to come up with something. You don't know exactly what the user is going to like or not like, but use good logic. And use logic that's simple, and use logic that you think is aligned to the user. So all this says is think like the user. Think what the user would do. Think what you would do. And that is why it's so important to test before you make a leap. So there are different ways to check for a site speed, which is a very, very important thing. One, of course, is through Google developers, which I think is absolutely brilliant. And you can just go to developers.google.com/speed/paid speed/insights to take a look at it. Now, if you look at the difference in site speed on mobile versus desktop for target.com, so we'll look at the Target website, and we'll look at the site speed on mobile versus desktop. Now, this also brings us back into the discussion on why companies love creating apps rather than just creating a mobile version or an M.dot version of their site. Because the app gives you much more control in terms of what loads, at what speed, and you're no longer contained by the browser issue or anything like that. So remember, every image, every module, every program code that calls for another program code, every DOM, which is a document object model, which is nothing but a script that basically connects between a programming language to a web page, every JavaScript, these can all change usability. So let's look at how that stacks up. So this is target.com mobile and target.com desktop. You'll see that target.com mobile has a 37% user or usability or site speed story, and it basically says this is not very good. 0 to 49 is not very good. This is from Google. 50 to 89 is fair. 90 to 100 is very good. On the other hand, target.com desktop has a 56 site speed, which is fair. Same company, different experiences based on where you're experiencing it. So if you're heading to target.com mobile versus target.com desktop, you've got very different sets, and this is how it looks like. This is the mobile rendition, this is the desktop rendition. You can see that there is a distinct difference between the mobile version and a desktop in terms of presentation and what's being laid. You can see that this has way more stuff. This is simplifying it, and most probably this is a horizontal scroll that's working through, and they both have the coronavirus update right out there. The entertainment for everybody has disappeared on the desktop, but it's on the mobile website. So you'll see that it got first contentful paint, right, FCP, first input delay, and it's telling you how many milliseconds it takes for the first delay to happen, and based on the lab data. And this is all, Google runs it for you for free, and it's absolutely fantastic of Google to do that. And you can see how the web page actually starts loading. So this is a sequence of how it starts loading. You know, this is the first part of the frame, or this is the header, stays active and goes live first, then followed by this section, and then the content is slowly filled. And then you see speed, index, time to interactive, and you simply put, you want these numbers to be lower, right? First meaningful paint, first CPU idle, which means this is consuming a lot of resources. Before the CPU idle basically means that this is after 13.5 seconds, the CPU can actually, your computer's processor can actually take a breather, which is not very good, which means you're putting a lot of stress onto the whole setup. Opportunities, now they're saying that manage your preload key requests, manage your properly sized images because they're screwing things up, defer offline images, and so forth. On the other hand, when you look at target.com desktop, you see that your CPU idle is faster in about 3.5 seconds. Your CPU can take a breather. The speed index is better. Opportunities, they're saying, are diagnostics. The only thing is preload key requests, manage that, and serve static assets with efficient cache policy. Minimize main thread work, reduce JavaScript execution time. So it gives you a good sense of what to do, right? So it's they're saying that it's on a Chrome user experience report, the 75th percentile of FCP, which is the first contentful paint, and the 95th percentile of FIT, which is the first input delay. That's what they're showing. So you can easily check for that. Of course, going back into opportunities, this just gives you a bit more idea in terms of opportunities and diagnostics. This goes back into the mobile thing, if I remember correctly. Diagnostics, they're saying minimize main thread work, reduce JavaScript execution time, serve static assets with an efficient cache policy, avoid an excessive DOM side. You've got 1008 elements, which are document object models, which are nothing but small programming scripts that are constantly revising the web content. Remember, we talked about design versus content. This is 1008 elements on the site that's constantly trying to refresh what's there. And you have to think of, is that all necessary? Because it's really impacting usability and user experience. So here you can see the ways www.target.com site can be made to load faster and increase usability. So, quick look how loading time affects your bottom line. And this is from KISS Metrics, thanks to them. First, every second counts. So loading time is a major contribution factor to page abandonment. The average user has no patience for a page that takes too long to load, and justifiably so, given that our switching costs are very low, which means that we can switch very quickly between one competing website to another competing website. If we feel that things are taking a bit longer, and we've all been prey to that, where if it takes more than for 5 seconds, we tend to automatically click the reload button because we are so impatient and we are such speed junkies. So observation, slow and low page response time results in increase in page abandonment, which basically means you're leaving the page and going somewhere else, as demonstrated by the following chart. So you see that as you start, as the page takes longer times in seconds to load, the chances of abandoning it. So if it takes 10 seconds to load, there's a 30% chance, which means 1 out of 3 people will leave the page and go somewhere else. If so, there's a distinct inflection point, right, where the trajectory seems to change at 4 seconds. So at 4 seconds, if it takes more than 4 seconds, then people suddenly seem to panic, right? This is where it tapers off. They either stay, so the leave rate or the abandonment rate goes down, but the abandonment rate between 1 second and 4 seconds is max, and 1 out of 4 people, if it takes around 4 seconds, will leave the site. Common problems when accessing a website from a mobile phone. 60% of mobile internet users say that they encountered at least one problem when browsing within the last month. So 75.3% of mobile internet users that they say they've encountered a website that was too slow to load, and 51% say that they've encountered a website that crashed from trying to load it or received an error. And these are big issues. Mobile versus desktop. Mobile internet users expect a web browser experience on their phone that's comparable to what they get on a desktop or laptop. I would say that today we say that we compare things based on our app experience. We compare how our experience is going based on how we experience an app, which is a much more contained version of any kind of user experience. What follows is a graph of how users thought mobile browsing experience compared to their desktop. And so this is one that compares desktop to mobile. Observation is most participants in the survey thought that their phone had slower load times than their desktops. So 11% of those surveys say that they expected the load time to be slower on their phones. 12% said that they expect the load times on their phones to be faster than their desktop. 21% said they expect that the load times on their phone to be about equal to their desktop. 25% said they expect the load times on their phone to be almost as fast as their desktop. 31% said they expect a bit slower on their phones. So most people tend to show that their phone's likely to be slower in terms of responses. Now, the question becomes, as a business person, how do you make that work? So the big story you have to understand is people expect that your web experience is going to be slower on your phone. Yet we are all becoming primarily mobile device first users, which means we tend to use mobile devices as a primary mechanism to access content, make shopping and purchase decisions and all that stuff. So this is central in terms of if you can reduce if 31% of the people, frankly speaking, 31 and 25 is 56, 56 and 21 is 77. So if you say 77% of the users expect that mobile is likely to match up, but most likely not to match up with desktop speed. If you can speed up your content loading on their mobile, the experience is likely to be better because you will offer them something more than what they expected. So it's very important. Going back to other problems, 48% say that they've encountered a website that had formatting issues that made it difficult to read. 45% said that they've encountered a website that didn't function as expected. 38% said that they've encountered a website that wasn't available, right, which is very much like a 404 error or something similar. Now, how website performance affects shopping behavior. 47% of consumers expect a web page to load in 2 seconds or late, or less, right? So people are expecting it to be very quick. So if you can push it forward where loading is quick, now of course, things such as the very fact that we're using things like Face ID or a thumbprint based IT. Remember, that's not the service running in the foreground. Unless that service is completed, the next service won't start. So for a bank, their loading time also depends on how quickly your CPU or your Face ID or your thumbprint ID is being able to process that service first before the page even loads. So remember that most services you add, you have to factor that in. 40% abandon a website that takes more than 3 seconds to load. 79%, nearly 80%, so 4/5 of users who are dissatisfied with website performance are less likely to buy from the same site again. 52% of online shoppers state that quick page loading is important for their site loyalty. A 1 second delay or 3 seconds of waiting decreases customer satisfaction by about 16%, and 44% of online shoppers will tell their friends about a bad experience online. So it tells you how important it is. And if you finally to look at the patience of mobile web users, the question is, how long are users willing to wait for a site to load before they abandon the page? The following graph seeks to answer the question. So the observation is that most participants in the survey would wait 6 to 10 seconds before they actually abandon a page, and that's what you see. So key pieces: a 1 second delay in page response can result in a 7% delay, a reduction in conversions. So if an e-commerce site is making $100,000 a day, a 1 second page delay could potentially cost you $2.5 million in lost sales every year. So it's very, very important to understand, but also understand the services that if you try to make it too rich, if you're trying to make it too dynamic, there's a cost associated with it. When other services are attached to it, there's a cost associated with it, and it's not. And loading time also affects usability of your site. So keep that in mind as you move forward, and try to constantly figure out ways to visualize what you find, because that's a good way of pushing the message through. Thank you.